Many buyers have a dilemma. Is a flat better than a house? For someone who wants a property on a budget, a flat might be their only choice. But if you're an investor, flats can be a great opportunity as they are generally cheaper to buy. Today, we're going to be highlighting the 7 points to be aware of when purchasing a flat. Hello, welcome back to our channel and podcast. My name is Gemma, and here at WS we talk about all things relating to money, mortgages and positive money mindset. So if that interests you, then be sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the thumbs up. It really helps with our YouTube algorithm and means that you won't miss out on any of our videos. On today's episode of Let's Talk Money and Mortgages, we have Iftika joining us once again. Ifti is a trained accountant and mortgage broker who's been in the industry for over 10 years, and he's also one of the founding directors here at WIS. Welcome back, Ifti. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm very well, thank you. How are you, Gemma?
I'm good. You look a little bit different.
I know. We're supporting the Lions. So, the tour of South Africa is on. We are looking forward to a win. So, yeah.
So, fingers crossed we're going to win this weekend.
Fingers crossed, yes, yeah.
So today we're going to be talking about the 7 points to be aware of when buying a flat. So the first point that we're going to make is, who is the flat for?
Yeah, so it depends on the end user who you're buying this property. If you're buying it for yourself, and let's say you have a family, let's say you have a little child or you have a little dog, flats might not always be the right thing for you. In that case, the house might be the right thing for you because you probably want a place to run around. Sometimes problems we have with some of the apartments are that you don't have a garden space, or even if you did have a garden space, it's a communal one. So you may have to share with people. So therefore, that might not necessarily work for you. And also, if you're someone like an investor, for investors who are looking at low maintenance and things like that, apartments might work better in many ways. It really depends on what you buy the apartment for. So just be careful. Obviously, flats can be a little cheaper, but be very mindful what's the main objective behind buying your apartment or the flat, because sometimes flat might not tick all your boxes. So you have to be a little careful with that one.
Okay, thanks, Ifti. So the second point that we have when buying a flat is you're likely to be buying the leasehold with a flat.
Yeah, that's the one you have to be very careful. Let me put it this way. So if you're buying a house, let's say house or flat, there's two components to this. So one is you have the land, and on top of the land, you got the house or you have the apartment or the flat. Now, this is the main difference between a house and a flat. So if you buy a house, you're buying the land as well as the house. But if you're buying a flat, which is likely to be under a leasehold, if it's in England and Wales, it's likely to be under a leasehold. So therefore, the land is owned by someone else. You'll have a landlord, right? So he's the one who owns the land. But you will be buying a lease of the landlord. So for example, it might be a 150-year lease or a 125-year lease. So you are buying the lease. So that's what you're doing. So you're not necessarily buying the land as well as the apartment. You're just buying the lease. Obviously, the leases have expiry date. So that's one of the issues that you find with these apartments. So just be very mindful. The shorter the lease, the more difficult it is as well, because banks are a little fussy if the lease is short. As a rule of thumb, we say the lease has to be around 75 years at least. So just be a little mindful, because shorter the lease, you may have problems. If you're buying it through a mortgage, it might be a problem for you to get a mortgage. So just be a little mindful of that.
Okay, thanks, Ifti. So point number 3, we have hidden costs.
Yeah, that's something that you have to be very careful about. So remember, like I said earlier, it's a lease you're buying, right? So somebody else owns the land, and if it's a block of flats, there are communal areas like your garden and communal hallways and communal maybe sitting areas. Now somebody's got to maintain that. Usually you have a maintenance company involved. So obviously the maintenance company is a company. They'll want to make a profit, and at the same time, they will try to keep the place as clean as possible. But you will have to contribute towards their bill. Now that can be a hidden cost. The reason why I'm saying it's a hidden cost is next year the bill will go up. So you don't know how much it's going to be next year. Most of the time they keep it in line with inflation, but there could be special clauses in your lease agreement which says, okay, after 10 years, we'll do a review. And based on the review, it could go up by an exorbitant amount, right? So just be a little careful about that. And likewise, your landlord also will charge you something called a ground rent. So you will have to pay the ground rent. And again, that is also subject to increase over a period of time. So be a little bit mindful. A lot of the time I find people say, okay, the flat is say 100,000, the house is maybe 125 or 150,000, but they go for the flat because it's cheap. yes, it is cheap. Your mortgage might be a little lower, but you may have other hidden costs like maintenance, ground rent that you have to pay, and those increases. So just be a little mindful of that.
Thanks, Ifti. The fourth one we have is major work costs.
So this is on top of the maintenance and the ground rent you pay. I'll take a very unfortunate example. You all know about the Grenfell Towers, right? So the Grenfell Towers burned down a few years ago. Because of that, the government came up with some regulations for apartments. So they had to make sure that none of these apartments had cladding. And also they wanted to make sure that they looked at it in a bit more a broader perspective. And they said, apart from the cladding, let's look at some other safety aspects as well. So after that, what the government did was they went and said, okay, if you want to have apartments, it has to meet certain criteria. So what that did was, the maintenance companies had to come back to the leaseholders and say, look, there's a big bill of say 100,000 coming and, there's say 20 apartments, your maintenance doesn't cover that, right? And you have to sort of pocket out, right? So if you're using the same example, 100,000 divided by 20, it's 5,000 pounds a head, right? So that's a major repair cost, right? So obviously the maintenance company won't pocket it or the landlord won't pocket it. It is the leaseholder who will have to pocket it, right? So if you have an apartment, that's a cost that you may have to bear as well. Likewise, the roof might go after a while or maintenance doesn't cover overall like painting once in a way that they do. So there are other things that can come up as you go, right? So be very mindful of that as well. So you may have to have a small provision for that.
Yeah. Definitely. Thank you, Ifti. It's a good one. Number 5, we have leases will restrict what you can do.
Yes, that's right. They always say the devil is in the detail, right? So a lot of people say, beautiful flat, let's go, let's buy it. My friend lives there or, there's good potential in this area. But have you looked at the lease properly? Be very careful. It has clauses which might restrict you in doing certain things, right? I'll just take an example. I know a lot of investors who buy apartments and they rent it out. And sometimes they put this on Airbnb or bookings.com or, they use this as sort of service apartments. But did you know that a lot of leases don't allow you to do that? So be a little mindful of that because there might be these special clauses which avoids you doing that. And I know sometimes people sublet their apartments, right? So you might think it's okay, but your lease might not allow you to do that. So you might be in a little bit of trouble if you try to do these things. So be a little mindful, go through the lease agreement before you buy an apartment or a flat because, there might be some clauses which might prevent you from doing certain things. So just be very mindful of that one.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Ifti. Number 6, we have appreciation may be less.
Yes. To be honest, in the 1990s, a lot of people went for apartments because it was like a fashion to have an apartment, right? And, there was good appreciation during that time, right? But I'm not sure whether this is correct now, right? Because, the appreciation might not be as high as it used to be before. Generally, people buy apartments for few reasons. 1, apartments are a little cheaper than houses. 2, it's easy for you to do the research, right? So, for example, if you're looking at a house, it's very difficult to check with your neighbor whether the house price is correct. But with apartments, it's kind of more or less the same with most apartments. So, it's easy to do your research as well. So people buy it for these sort of reasons, right? But what happens is apartments are generally appealing for people who are sort of first time moving into a house, which is kind of a stepping stone before they buy a house, right? So it's mainly appealing for people like that. A lot of the time, apartments are owned by investors. So because of that, if you have to sell the apartment, you may have to sell it to an investor. But you know how investors are, right? So they will be quite hard on negotiating prices. So you may not get the price that you want later. So you might not get that appreciation with apartments. I'm not saying it's true all over the country and it's for all apartments because you might have a luxury penthouse or you might have it in a very sought after area. So, you might get appreciations in that. But in general, the appreciations I think is a little lower compared to some of the houses.
Yeah, thanks, Ifti. And the 7th point that we have is lease extension might be costly.
Oh, yes. Be very careful of this one because, like I said, banks generally prefer a lease of about 75 years left. So let's say you bought a property and you sort of now crossed that barrier, right? So you're now into the 74th year, 74 years to go now. So with that situation, you'll have to go to the landlord and tell, look, I need to extend my lease. Be careful, they might charge you exorbitant amounts, right? So do a little bit of research before you jump into buying the apartment. see how much the lease extension costs, right? Because you don't want that to be a sudden bill coming your way. I'll give you an example. Once I was just browsing around apartments. I fancied looking at an apartment in South Kensington, right? And I looked at it. The apartment price was only 800,000. I thought, okay, this is so too good to be true. So I just looked at the detail. It said there's only 8 years lease left, right? So I thought I'll probably call them and ask how much this is going to cost, right, to get the extension. And they said it costs 1.2 million to extend the lease, right? Of course, this is an extreme example, but all what I'm trying to say is it could be as expensive as that as well, right? So you don't want to sort of get caught out with these things. That's why I'm saying, like, this is a point for you to be mindful. If you're trying to buy an apartment, see how much a lease extension costs. And if you're trying to buy an apartment and if the lease is short, it might be a good idea to get the existing leaseholder to extend the lease, because they've lived in the property. Because otherwise there's a condition where you've got to own the property for at least 2 years before you can go for a lease extension. So there is conditions like that you have to be very mindful of. So if you're trying to buy an apartment and if the lease is short, I think the best option for you to is go to the current owner and say, can you please extend the lease, right? So because that might work better.
Okay, thanks, Ifti. So if we're a person thinking, should I get a house or get a flat? We've obviously gone through the main points for flats, but is there anything to sort of look out for purchasing a house, which you might not realize?
Yeah, so houses also you got to be a little careful. Obviously, everything is not rosy with a house, right? Because obviously we spoke about a lot of things to be mindful when you're buying a flat. But with the house as well, nowadays some of the newer houses have maintenance, so be very mindful of that, right? Because before there wasn't a problem. I know there's a lot of TV programs going around this subject as well. So you may have maintenance to pay in houses.
Because that's the same, also, isn't it? It can also go up after a review period, right?
Yeah, it could do, right? Usually after about 2 years, it could go up, right? So just be a little mindful of that. And obviously with maintenance, right, it's you who have to do the maintenance, right? For example, if your wall breaks down, it's not everybody who is pulling towards this, but it's you who is pulling towards that, right? So yes, you won't be paying a monthly maintenance, but you might have bigger bills coming months in a way, right? So, you have those problems as well with houses. And some houses, this is not very common, can be on a lease as well, right? In certain areas, there are things like that. So you have to be a little bit mindful when you buy houses as well.
Okay, thanks, Ifti. That's some great advice. I just wanted to put a reminder out there that these points may or may not be applicable to everybody. So please do check with an advisor to make sure they're suitable for you. And if you don't have an advisor, I will leave our WS contact details below, as we are always happy to help. A little reminder that a mortgage is secured against your home or property and can be repossessed if you do not keep up with the mortgage repayments. Thank you for joining us again today. Have a great week, stay safe, and we'll see you again soon for another episode of Let's Talk Money and Mortgages.